Hi, nice to see everyone. My name is Tom Broussard. New article today, a guy named Gerald Edelman, another scientist, tremendous scientist, became a Nobel Prize winner. The title of this article is Second Nature, Brain Science, and Human Nature. After my stroke, which was the September of 2011, that the next summer, so 6-9 months later, for whatever reason, I was searching through the web to see more information about stroke and aphasia. I began to understand about plasticity, this ability that we all have, all humans have, all learning has, with this thing called plasticity, that has that capacity to grow new parts of the brain matter, new parts would turn out to be new parts of healthy neurons to create new, what we call branches and leaves, otherwise called dendrites and synapses. And as I kept looking online, not that I could, quote, read some of his books, but I could see from their titles and their table of contents that they were very, very important. And as that year went through, when I began to read with meaning, that summer, I began to obviously read more and more. I mentioned it to you before. I read the title, then I read this table of contents. Then often I will go look at the index in the back, and then start to read more and more of each chapter. So I did buy that book early. I would say now 12 years ago. And over the years, I've read it many times, highlighted it many times to begin to understand from his perspective how the brain works. And his long-term, 50 plus years as a scientist, continuing to figure out how the brain works, how learning works, how education works. And he started doing several books, 3 in a row, then another 3 in a row. It's basically building up anybody who's interested in knowing more about the brain and how it works. You could read each one of those, and he led you to understand it. So he gave you these books, sort of the beginning of it, the middle of it, and the end. As you learn more information, so you're basically better able to understand what the next new language would mean if you read the second book and the third book and the fourth book, the fifth book and the sixth book. So anyway, over the years, I bought a couple of his books, especially what I'll call the last one, and that's the last one that ends with the last book, Second Nature, Brain Science and Human Knowledge, because even from his perspective, he had moved his way through the biological component of that, and came to the conclusion, of course, that everything with plasticity has to do with learning and education. So again, I'll get to that here going forward. But anyway, he was quite something. He was born in New York, obviously, and grew up there, and ended up going to his high school, college in Pennsylvania, then his MD in Pennsylvania, at the University of Pennsylvania in Philly, and then moved from that into an institute in California, again, talking about neuroscience. So the big issue of his work is something called neurodarwinism. And everybody should hear that word, and then if possible, at least read it online, if not getting the book, neurodarwinism. And all of us understand how evolution works. And as he was studying, he was beginning to understand that as much as Darwin and evolution, in terms of natural selection, meaning for the populations of humans and species going forward, which takes, thousands of years to make the effect as a result of various environments that change over time. If you're living in Africa, it changes the way your body works. If you're living in the Arctic, it changes the way your body works. And that takes years and years and years of natural selection, but it does happen. And that is the theory of evolution. And it's one that most scientific minded people understand about plasticity, since the world is not flat. Um, but he wrote about neuro-Darwinism and plasticity as I began to understand it and realized that the population that he was addressing, if Darwin was addressing the species and the people within those mass of people going forward, Edelman was really discussing the population of neurons and the neuron group. The subtitle of neuroplasticity, I'm sorry, neuro Darwinism actually talks about the neurological group selection as part of the population that we are discussing. And to the degree that individual neurons are very, on the one hand, they're very powerful. On the other hand, they are quite ignorant. And until they come together to become groups, that then we be able to see that those groups have more personality, more understanding of who they are as a group going forward, neurological group going forward. And the evolution of each of those groups is what happens with the natural selection of those populations while within the individual lives going forward. So not the millenniums of evolution for the species, but the evolution of the brain of the individual human to which we are discussing, which all of us, and that continues to evolve with the neuro group selection component of the population of those groups and the neurons themselves. And that is what he was working on going forward. Given that the evolution for those species with Darwin obviously grew changed very slowly, yet for the populations that we're talking about, they happen fairly quickly because the environment around that individual, the enriched environment, we talked about that last week, the enriched environment creates that environment so that the behavior changes within the life of that individual going forward. And as Edelman was working on all this, and that typically means, like him with me, he goes back and continues to read all of the prior scientists of what they were trying to figure out in their time, and leaving information, books, so others could study it more. Edelman had been reading about a guy named Baldwin, about 30 years before him, who had written about and ended up calling something called the Baldwin effect, basically as a learned behavior for individuals as a factor of evolution, as it were. So that became part of what he had adopted from Baldwin into what Edelman was writing about. It is interesting, and I added that in the article, that, believe it or not, you might remember Penfield, which we talked about several months ago, was in a particular ship during World War II, crossing the English Channel between France and England, and a German U-boat submarine sent a torpedo and blew up that ship, the Essex. You might remember that with Penfield. Well, it turns out that Baldwin was in the same ship. He was there when the torpedo exploded. He wasn't damaged. Baldwin wasn't hurt. Obviously, Penfield was really severely hurt, and got better over time. But it's so interesting to me that coming so close in that small world component of finding two scientists in the same ship with the same torpedo a long time ago is really quite amazing. So I did add that there. And it's amazing that there were quite a few Americans who were on board that ship, and no Americans were killed, although several people were killed and injured as a result of that attack. But as Edelman was working through basically 50 years of work, citing his understanding going forward that leads you to understanding neuro Darwinism in terms of what he had presented as a new theory for how the brain works for individuals. And then finally, as I mentioned before, the brain science and human knowledge of consciousness. So being more conscious, or being conscious of who you are and what it is you are doing or not doing, learning or not learning, being conscious of that, being aware of that, is how education works. And as he closed, meaning finished his work, he began to understand, as it says is here in that last book, the theory, I'm reading this quote, the theory of knowledge in understanding of how the brain works. As he, and then William James, another one of our articles in this year's work, knows that consciousness is the function of knowing. The function of knowing. So that is what Edelman distilled all of that of his 50 years, never mind William James or Baldwin's, distilling after 50 years of work into individual sentences that are very important for all of us going forward. And that is, from his perspective, that consciousness is the process whose function is knowing, which is learning, which is understanding. That's how consciousness occurs, as opposed to those other species who were not necessarily conscious of the inside of who they were in terms of what they could or could not do going forward. So as Edelman has told us, evolution and plasticity are the foundation of all learning when it comes to humans who learn. And as he said in another one of the articles, and you've also seen this too before, that people cannot not learn at any stage. So even though some people used to think that the brain is static at a certain time, and that's where it is, and that's where it stays, now all of us now begin to understand, and that's what I try to do, is help other people who really don't know much about the brain, as I didn't know anything about it, to understand that we can continue to learn at any point in our lives. So lifelong learning isn't just a slogan. It is real. It is what we do on a day-to-day, moment-to-moment basis going forward, such that we now, I say we now, as if you knew, but you need to understand how the brain works, how it learns, and teachers and educators need to also understand how the brain works so they can help share their knowledge as teachers by understand much more about how the brain works, so that they, the teacher, as well as their students, can better understand how that process works. And you've heard me talk about this before. I was just lucky enough that I was damaged enough to see the damage, but was able to climb back up and express to others what I had seen, what I call down there, because I could see it and now can express that to others. Obviously now learning an awful lot about these scientists going forward, basically matching what I had seen, now looking for, oh, how did I see that? I go looking for, how did I get better, getting based on what they had done, these scientists had done. And that's how I got to put together what I had seen in terms of damage and recovery, and then map that into the information that the other scientists had written down. So you can put that frame on top of them and go, oh, this is how I got better. This is how you, as a teacher, would like their students to know more about what they want to learn about. And they have to be more conscious of that. And it happens as a result of somebody, meaning anybody, the teacher as well as the student, to understand how the brain actually works. And you don't have to know a whole lot. You don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to know me, who's been reading these hundreds and hundreds of books many, many times, to be able to begin to understand what it was I had seen. Now, all I am trying to do is basically tell you more about how I had seen down there. And to the degree you can start to study that, you too can better understand why Darwinism, as a good example, is something that we all should know, I say, even just a little bit about. As Edelman concluded, and this is, like I say, he wrote all these books and ended with the one that is sort of the essence of what he had done. And now I'll end with almost his last sentence, believe it or not, of that last book, about the fact that people cannot not learn. And he ends with, plastic nature of brain development, which may be considered never to stop until we die. So that's the summation of all of his work, is to tell you that you cannot not learn. And as long as you're more conscious of that, then you can begin to understand that whatever you have done in your life, whatever successes you have done in your life, you will be even more successful of understanding that if you begin to understand the foundation, the underlying component of how the brain learns and how we all learn as we become more conscious of that underlying processing. I know. Sometimes it's hard to see some of this stuff, but when you get right down to it, it turns out to just be language we can better understand with the great teachers we have had, as our great teachers become greater still by understanding just a little bit more about how the brain works and plasticity. Thank you very much. Nice to see you. This is the second to the last. Did I have that right? No, maybe there's two more. But we're coming to the end of the series, meaning we're coming to the end of this month. And I'm going to do this this week, and then two more articles. And then we are done. I'll be taking a little bit of a break for a month or two. I'll still be writing a little bit, but I still have to come up with my next set of understandings will be for 2024. Nice to see everybody. Take care of yourself and see you soon. Bye.